When my son took over the family business, I sold my house and gave him $50,000 to invest. At the company party, he gave me a $5 flower, then called his mother-in-law on stage and gave her a $7,000 ring. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm Opal, and at 64, I thought I knew my place in this world. I thought I understood my son. I was wrong about everything. The morning I sold my house, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. The realtor handed me the check, and I stared at those numbers, my entire life reduced to digits on paper. 43 years in that house. 43 years of memories, of raising Levi alone after his father walked out when he was 7. But I wasn't being sentimental. This was business. This was investing in my son's future. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Henderson?" the realtor asked, probably seeing the hesitation in my eyes. I nodded firmly. My son needs this investment. Family comes first. The drive to Levi's office took 20 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, how proud I was that he was taking over the family business, how this $50,000 would help him expand. The company my late husband had started as a small construction firm had grown modestly over the years, but Levi had vision. At least, that's what I told myself. When I walked into his office, Levi barely looked up from his computer. His secretary had announced me, but he kept typing. "Mom, you really didn't need to come in person for this," he said, finally glancing at me. "A wire transfer would have been easier." I pulled the check from my purse, my hands slightly trembling. "I wanted to see your face when I gave this to you. This represents everything I've saved, everything I've worked for." He took the check, glanced at it briefly, and set it on his desk like it was a grocery list. "Thanks. This'll help with the expansion plans." That was it. No hug, no acknowledgement of what this meant. Just a casual thanks, like I'd brought him coffee. "Levi, honey, I know this is a big step for you, taking over the company. Your father would be so proud." He sighed, still not really looking at me. "Yeah, well, times are different now. We need to modernize everything. The old ways don't work anymore." The old ways? Was that what I represented to him? Something outdated that needed to be discarded? "I was thinking," I continued, trying to keep the conversation going, "maybe I could help with the books or the customer relations. I know this business inside and out. Mom, no offense, but Rachel and I have it handled. She's got an MBA, and she understands modern business practices. We appreciate the investment, but we need professional management now." Rachel, his wife of 3 years, the woman who smiled sweetly to my face while systematically pushing me out of every family decision. The woman who somehow convinced my son that his mother's 30 years of business experience was worthless compared to her fresh degree. I left his office feeling smaller than when I'd entered, but I pushed those feelings down. This was normal, I told myself. Sons grow up. They become independent. I should be proud. The company's annual celebration was held at the downtown convention center 3 weeks later. I bought a new dress, navy blue with small flowers, nothing too flashy. I wanted to look appropriate for what Levi called a professional networking event. I arrived early, hoping to help with setup, but the catering staff had everything handled. The room filled quickly with employees, clients, and their families. I found myself standing near the back, watching Levi work the room with Rachel by his side. She looked stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They moved together like a power couple, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments, playing their parts perfectly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Levi's voice boomed through the microphone as he took the stage. "Thank you all for celebrating another successful year with Henderson Construction." Applause filled the room. I clapped too, my heart swelling with pride despite everything. This was my son, my boy, leading the company his father had built. "I want to thank everyone who made this year possible," he continued. "Our dedicated employees, our loyal clients, and especially my family." My heart jumped. He was going to acknowledge me, thank me for the investment, for everything I'd sacrificed. "Mom, could you come up here for a moment?" I made my way through the crowd, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment at being the center of attention, but also with anticipation. Finally, he was going to recognize what I meant to this family, to this business. When I reached the stage, Levi smiled that charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble since he was 5 years old. "I want to thank my mother, Opal Henderson, for all her support over the years." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped gift. My heart raced. In front of all these people, he was finally going to show how much he valued me. I unwrapped it carefully, aware that dozens of eyes were watching. Inside was a single silk flower, the kind you buy at a gas station for $5. "It's beautiful," I managed to say, my voice catching slightly. The applause was polite but brief. "And now," Levi continued, his voice gaining energy, "I want to call up someone truly special. Rachel's mother, Mrs. Patricia Lawson, has been instrumental in helping us understand modern business practices. She's been a mentor and guide as we've navigated this transition." Rachel's mother, elegant in her designer suit, glided onto the stage with the confidence of someone who knew she belonged there. "Patricia," Levi said, "your wisdom and guidance have been invaluable, as a small token of our appreciation." He pulled out a jewelry box. Even from where I stood, I could see it was from an expensive store. Patricia opened it, and the diamond ring inside caught the stage lights, sparkling like captured stars. "It's a friendship ring," Levi announced, "but really, you're family now." The applause was thunderous. People were actually standing. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, overwhelmed by the gesture. I stood there, clutching my $5 silk flower, watching my son shower affection and expensive gifts on a woman who had known him for 3 years while I, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, raided a gas station flower. The room spun slightly. I excused myself and walked to the ladies' room, where I stared at my reflection in the fluorescent lighting. The woman looking back at me looked old, tired, invisible. When had I become so disposable? I splashed cold water on my face and took several deep breaths. This was fine. This was normal. Rachel's mother was helping with the business. The ring was just gratitude. The flower was. The flower was a message. When I returned to the main room, I caught sight of Harold Morrison, my attorney, standing near the bar. He raised his glass to me in a subtle toast, and I nodded back. As I watched my son continue his speech, talking about new directions and fresh perspectives, I realized something had shifted inside me. The hurt was there, deep and aching, but underneath it was something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Driving home from the company celebration, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. The silk flower sat on my passenger seat, mocking me with its artificial cheerfulness. $5. That's what 37 years of motherhood was worth to my son. I pulled into my driveway, except it wasn't my driveway anymore. The new owners were moving in next week. I was staying at a small apartment across town, a temporary arrangement until I figured out what came next. But sitting in that rental car, staring at the house where I'd raised Levi, the memories came flooding back whether I wanted them or not. Levi was 7 when Robert left us. I remember coming home from my job at the bank to find a note on the kitchen counter, not even the courtesy of a face-to-face goodbye. "I can't do this anymore, Opal. I need something different." That was it. 20 years of marriage reduced to 2 sentences. Levi found me crying at that same kitchen table later that night. "Where's Daddy?" he asked, his small hands clutching a toy truck. "Daddy had to go away for work," I lied, pulling him onto my lap. "But I'm here. I'll always be here." And I was. Through everything that followed, I was there. The bank job paid enough to cover basics, but barely. So I took a second job cleaning offices at night. Levi would do his homework in empty conference rooms while I vacuumed and dusted. Sometimes he'd fall asleep on a couch, and I'd carry him to the car at midnight, his small body heavy in my arms. "Why do you work so much, Mama?" he asked me once when he was 10. So you can have everything you need, I told him. So you can go to college and be anything you want. He seemed to accept that. Back then, he still hugged me goodnight. When Levi turned 12, I discovered his gift for numbers. His math teacher called me in for a conference. Mrs. Henderson, Levi has real potential in business and mathematics. Have you considered accelerated programs? I had. I'd researched every option, every scholarship, every opportunity. But most required investments I couldn't afford. Special tutoring, summer programs, equipment. So I took a third job, weekend bookkeeping for small businesses. My days started at 6 in the morning and ended after midnight. I survived on coffee and the dream of Levi's future. Mom, you don't have to work so hard, teenage Levi told me one Sunday when I dozed off during his school presentation. I can get a job, help out. No, I said firmly. Your job is to study. Mine is to make sure you can. I worked myself into exhaustion so he could focus on academics. When he got accepted to business school with a partial scholarship, I was so proud I cried for an hour. But partial wasn't full. I took out loans against the house to cover the rest. I'll pay you back, Mom, he promised the day I drove him to campus. When I'm running Dad's old company, I'll pay back every penny. I believed him, not because I needed the money back, but because I trusted his gratitude would last. But something changed during college. His phone calls became shorter, less frequent. When he brought Rachel home during his senior year, I could feel the shift immediately. Rachel was polished in a way I'd never been. She spoke about market strategies and brand positioning like she was born understanding these concepts. Her parents were professors at the university. She'd grown up in academic circles, summer houses, intellectual discussions over wine. Opal, she said the first time she stayed for dinner, it's so interesting how you managed to keep this little company going after Robert left. So quaint. Quaint, like I was a museum piece. I watched her study our house during that visit, her eyes cataloging what needed updating, what didn't meet her standards. When she suggested Levi might want to modernize his approach to the family business, I felt the first chill of what was coming. After they married, the changes accelerated. Suddenly, my weekly dinners with Levi became monthly, then sporadic. When I called, Rachel often answered, "Oh, Opal, Levi's in meetings. You know how busy he is with the transition planning. I'll have him call you back." He rarely did. The company had been struggling since Robert left. I'd managed to keep it afloat, but barely. When Levi graduated and expressed interest in taking over, I was relieved. Finally, the sacrifices would pay off. The business would grow. The family legacy would continue. But the Levi who returned from college wasn't the boy I'd raised. This version was impatient with my questions, dismissive of my experience. When I suggested we review the books together, he'd sigh. "Mom, I appreciate everything you've done, but I need to approach this professionally now. Rachel's been helping me understand modern business practices." Rachel's influence grew like ivy, subtle but strangling. She convinced Levi that family and business shouldn't mix, that emotional decisions led to financial disasters. Every tradition I'd tried to maintain was examined and found wanting. "The Christmas bonuses are outdated," she told Levi one December. "Performance-based incentives are more effective." "Family barbecues for employees create liability issues," she said another time. "Professional boundaries are important." Piece by piece, she dismantled the culture Robert and I had built, replacing warmth with efficiency, loyalty with profit margins. I tried to adapt. I bought business magazines, read articles about modern management. I suggested computer upgrades, new marketing strategies. But everything I offered was met with polite dismissal. "That's an interesting idea, Mom, but we're working with consultants now who specialize in this area." The consultants, I later learned, were Rachel's former classmates. The night I decided to sell my house, I'd been sitting in my empty living room, surrounded by boxes of memories no one else seemed to value. Levi had called to tell me about his expansion plans, his voice bright with excitement. "We could double our revenue in 2 years, Mom, but we need capital for equipment, marketing, new hires. It's a big investment." "How much do you need?" I asked, already knowing I'd find a way. Honestly, about 50,000 would get us started, but don't worry about it. We'll figure something out. I hung up and called the realtor that same night. Now, sitting in front of the house I'd sacrificed for him, holding a $5 flower while Rachel's mother wore a $7,000 ring, I finally understood what I'd been too blind to see. I wasn't Levi's mother anymore. I was just another investor who'd outlived her usefulness. But what Levi didn't know, what Rachel didn't know, was that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than they could imagine. The hurt I felt tonight wasn't surprise. It was confirmation that everything Harold and I had discussed was absolutely necessary. The next morning, I sat in Harold Morrison's office, the same office where Robert and I had first drawn up our wills 25 years ago. Harold was one of the few people who knew the whole story, not just the version Levi and Rachel had constructed, but the truth about what I'd built and what I'd sacrificed. "How are you feeling after last night?" Harold asked, pouring me coffee from the pot he kept on his credenza. His voice carried the gentle concern of someone who'd watched me navigate decades of difficult decisions. "Like I've been sleepwalking for 3 years," I admitted, "but I'm awake now." Harold nodded, settling behind his desk. At 72, he moved more slowly than he used to, but his mind was sharp as ever. He'd been Robert's friend before he became our attorney, and after Robert left, he'd helped me understand the legal complexities of running the business alone. "Tell me what you observed last night," he said, pulling out a thick folder I recognized immediately. Everything we suspected, the dismissal, the favoritism toward Rachel's family, the complete lack of respect for my contributions. I paused, remembering the weight of that silk flower in my hands. Harold, when did I become so invisible to my own son? "The question isn't when," Harold replied gently. "The question is what we're going to do about it now that you see it clearly." He opened the folder, and I saw the documents we'd been preparing for months. Most people would be surprised to learn that I'd been planning for this possibility since the day Levi announced his engagement. But I'd spent too many years watching other women get blindsided by family members who saw them as obstacles rather than people. "Let's review what we have," Harold said, spreading papers across his desk. The first document was the original incorporation papers for Henderson Construction, filed by Robert in 1987. What most people didn't realize, what Levi didn't realize, was that I'd been listed as co-owner from the beginning. When Robert left, those shares didn't disappear. They became mine entirely. "Explain to me again how Levi thinks he owns the company," Harold said, though we'd been through this before. When he came back from college, he was so confident about taking over. He talked about it like it was already decided, like ownership was just naturally his because he was Robert's son. I never corrected him because I wanted him to feel confident, to take initiative. I shook my head at my own naivety. I thought if he proved himself capable, we'd formalize the transfer properly. But no transfer ever occurred. No. I kept waiting for him to ask the right questions, to show interest in the legal aspects, but he was so focused on the operational side, and Rachel kept pushing him to think bigger than paperwork. I think she assumed the business would just fall to him eventually. Harold made a note. "And the 50,000 you invested last month?" That was a personal loan to the company, documented properly. I pulled out my copy of the loan agreement Harold had insisted I use instead of just writing a check, with interest and repayment terms. "Which brings us to the shares," Harold continued. This was the part that still amazed me. 6 months ago, when I'd first started feeling uneasy about Rachel's influence, I'd asked Harold to review the company's structure. What we discovered was that in all his enthusiasm to modernize and expand, Levi had never actually taken legal control of the business. "He's been operating as if he owns it," Harold explained, "but legally, you retain 60% ownership. The remaining 40% was held in trust for him, pending proper succession planning that never happened." So when he gave me that flower last night, he was disrespecting the majority owner of his company. The irony wasn't lost on me. Levi thought he was dismissing his demanding mother. In reality, he was insulting his business partner. "There's something else," Harold said, his tone becoming more serious. "I've been reviewing the company's recent financial records, the ones you're entitled to see as majority owner." He handed me a spreadsheet that made my stomach drop. "Harold, these numbers. I know. The company's spending has increased dramatically since Levi took operational control. Look at this line item: executive entertainment." I scanned the figures. $12,000 in 3 months? For entertainment? I had my assistant do some research. It includes the jewelry purchase for Rachel's mother, a weekend getaway for their anniversary, and several expensive dinners with potential clients who never materialized into actual business. My hands tightened on the papers. He's using company funds for personal expenses. It appears so. And here's the concerning part. With these spending patterns, the company will be in financial trouble within 6 months, even with your $50,000 injection. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of betrayal settle deeper. Not only had Levi disrespected me personally, but he was mismanaging the business I'd helped build and preserve. "What are my options?" I asked. Harold pulled out another set of documents. "As majority owner, you have several. You can call a board meeting and review all financial decisions. You can require approval for expenditures over a certain amount. Or you can exercise your rights as majority shareholder and resume active control of the company." The thought was both terrifying and liberating. I'd stepped back to give Levi space to lead, but he'd interpreted my respect for his autonomy as abdication of my authority. What would that look like practically? "You'd be back in charge of major decisions. Levi could remain as operational manager, but under your oversight. All significant expenditures would require your approval, and any changes to company policy or structure would need your consent." I thought about the way Levi had dismissed my suggestions, how Rachel had convinced him that family involvement was unprofessional. They'd wanted me out of the business. Now they were about to learn why that had been a mistake. "There's one more thing you should know," Harold said, his voice careful. "I received a call yesterday from a business broker. Someone's been inquiring about Henderson Construction's availability for sale." "What? Who?" "The inquiry was anonymous, but the timing is suspicious. My guess is that Levi and Rachel are exploring options that would give them liquidity without having to deal with the family complications." The betrayal cut deeper. They weren't just dismissing me. They were planning to sell the company my husband built that I'd sacrificed to preserve without even consulting me. "Harold, I want to call a board meeting." "When?" "This week. It's time my son learned who actually owns this company." Harold smiled, the first time I'd seen him look pleased in months. "I'll prepare the proper notices. As majority shareholder, you have the right to call an emergency meeting with 48 hours notice." "And the financial review?" "I'll have a complete audit ready. Every expenditure, every decision, every policy change since Levi took operational control. If he wants to run a company, he's going to learn what real accountability looks like." I left Harold's office feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Powerful. Not vindictive, not angry, but clear about my worth and my rights. Levi thought he could dismiss me with a cheap flower while lavishing expensive gifts on others. He was about to discover that respect wasn't optional when dealing with your business partner. The drive home gave me time to think about what came next. I wasn't trying to hurt my son or destroy what we'd built together, but I was done being treated like an inconvenience in my own family's business. That evening, I called Levi. Rachel answered as usual. "Oh, hi, Opal. Levi's reviewing some proposals. Can I have him call you back?" "Actually, Rachel, I need to speak with him now. It's about business." There was a pause. Rachel wasn't used to hearing authority in my voice. "Let me get him." When Levi came to the phone, his tone was distracted. "Hey, Mom. What's up? I'm pretty busy tonight." "I'm calling to inform you that I've scheduled a board meeting for Thursday at 2 o'clock. Harold will send the formal notice tomorrow." "A board meeting?" "Mom, we don't really do formal board meetings. If you have questions about the business, we can just talk." "Levi, I said quietly. This isn't a request. As majority shareholder, I'm calling an emergency board meeting to review company operations and financial management. I expect you and any other relevant parties to be there. The silence stretched for several seconds. Majority shareholder? Yes, son. I think it's time we had a proper conversation about how this company actually works. Thursday afternoon arrived gray and drizzling, which seemed fitting for what I knew would be an uncomfortable conversation. I dressed carefully, a navy suit I'd worn to important bank meetings years ago, updated with a silk blouse and pearl earrings. I wanted to look like what I was, a businesswoman, not just somebody's mother. I arrived at the Henderson Construction Office 15 minutes early. The conference room felt different now that I understood my actual position here. This wasn't Levi's domain that I was entering as a guest. This was my company, where I was allowing him to work. Harold sat across from me, his briefcase open and files organized. He'd prepared 3 copies of every document, one for me, one for Levi, and one for the company records. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "Like I'm about to wake up from a very long dream," I replied. Levi arrived exactly on time, Rachel close behind him. I noticed how she scanned the room, taking in Harold's presence and the formal setup. Her expression shifted from mild curiosity to concern. "Mom, I still don't understand why we need Harold here for a family discussion," Levi said, settling into a chair across from me. "Because this isn't a family discussion," I replied evenly. "This is a business meeting between partners." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Partners?" Harold opened his briefcase and pulled out the first set of documents. "Perhaps we should start with the company's current ownership structure." He slid papers across the table to both Levi and Rachel. I watched my son's face as he read, seeing confusion give way to something approaching panic. "I don't understand," Levi said slowly. "These papers show you owning 60% of the company." "That's correct," I replied. "I've been the majority owner since your father left. You've been operating under management authority I granted you, but ownership never transferred." Rachel snatched the papers from Levi's hands, her eyes scanning rapidly. "This can't be right. You retired. You stepped back." "I stepped back from daily operations," I clarified. "I never retired from ownership." Harold pulled out another folder. "This brings us to the financial review Mrs. Henderson requested as majority shareholder." "Financial review?" Levi's voice cracked slightly. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. "As a business owner, I have the right to examine how company funds are being used." Harold spread out printouts showing the last 6 months of company expenditures. The numbers were even worse than what he'd shown me in his office. "Levi," I said, pointing to specific line items, "can you explain these charges? $1,700 for a dinner at the Metropolitan? $3,000 for a weekend at the Ritz-Carlton? A jewelry purchase for $7,000? Levi shifted uncomfortably. Those were business expenses, client entertainment, relationship building. "Which clients?" Harold asked, consulting his notes. "I called the restaurant and the hotel. Neither occasion included anyone outside your immediate family." Rachel's face flushed. "This is harassment. Every business has entertainment expenses." "Every business does," I agreed. "But most don't charge personal jewelry purchases to company accounts, especially when that jewelry was a gift to the owner's mother-in-law at a company celebration. The ring. I'd suspected it the moment Levi pulled out that expensive box, but seeing it itemized in the company's books made my stomach turn. "That ring was a token of appreciation," Rachel said defensively. "My mother has been instrumental in advising the company's growth strategies." "Your mother has no official role with Henderson Construction," Harold replied, checking another document. "She's not an employee, consultant, or board member. She's not entitled to gifts purchased with company funds." Levi ran his hands through his hair. "Mom, I can explain all of this. Business entertainment is normal. The ring was maybe a mistake, but we can reimburse." "The ring is just one item," I interrupted. "Harold, show them the full analysis." Harold pulled out a comprehensive breakdown that painted a damaging picture. In 6 months, Levi had increased company spending by 40% while revenue remained flat. The $50,000 I'd invested was already nearly gone, absorbed by modernization efforts that seemed to consist mainly of expensive dinners and office decorations. At this rate, Harold said matter-of-factly, Henderson Construction will be insolvent within 4 months. That's impossible, Rachel snapped. The company is growing. We have new clients, new opportunities. Which clients? I asked. I've reviewed the actual contracts. Revenue is down 12% from last year. Levi looked stricken. The expansion takes time. We're investing in growth. You're spending money the company doesn't have on personal luxuries, I said firmly. This isn't investment. It's mismanagement. Rachel stood up abruptly. I don't have to sit here and listen to accusations. Levi, we should go. Sit down, I said quietly, but with authority I hadn't used in years. This meeting isn't over. Rachel hesitated, clearly unused to being spoken to that way by me. Slowly she sat back down. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Effective immediately, all company expenditures over $500 require my written approval. All company credit cards are suspended pending review. Any personal charges to company accounts will be reimbursed within 30 days or deducted from salaries. You can't do that, Rachel said, her voice shaking with anger. Actually, she can, Harold replied calmly. As majority owner, Mrs. Henderson has the authority to implement any financial controls she deems necessary. Levi looked from Harold to me, understanding finally dawning. Mom, are you taking the company away from me? The pain in his voice almost broke my resolve. This was still my son, still the little boy I'd worked 3 jobs to support, but he was also a grown man who disrespected me publicly while mismanaging the business I'd sacrificed to preserve. I'm not taking anything away from you, I said carefully. I'm taking back what was always mine. You can continue as operations manager, but under proper supervision. This is ridiculous, Rachel said, standing again. Levi, we don't have to accept this. We can fight this legally. Harold smiled slightly. I'd be happy to represent Mrs. Henderson in any legal proceedings. The ownership documents are quite clear, and the financial mismanagement is well documented. Financial mismanagement? Levi's voice rose. I'm building something here. I'm trying to grow the business my father started. Your father started this business, I said quietly, but I'm the one who kept it alive after he left. I'm the one who worked multiple jobs to pay the bills when you were too young to understand. I'm the one who took out loans against my house to fund your education. And I'm the one who sold that house to give you $50,000 to invest in expansion. The room fell silent except for the rain pattering against the windows. I gave you management responsibility because I trusted you, I continued. But trust has to be earned, and you've shown me that you care more about impressing Rachel's family than respecting mine. Levi's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I never meant. You gave me a $5 flower while spending $7,000 company dollars on jewelry for someone else's mother, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion behind it. That tells me everything I need to know about how you value my contributions. Rachel grabbed Levi's arm. We don't have to stay for this abuse, come on. But Levi didn't move. He stared at the papers spread across the table, at the evidence of his financial mismanagement, at the legal reality of his position. What do you want from me? He asked finally. I want you to prove you can run a business responsibly, I replied. I want you to show me the respect I've earned through 30 years of sacrifice. And I want you to remember that being a son doesn't entitle you to anything. You have to earn what you get, just like everyone else. Harold began gathering his documents. Mrs. Henderson will be resuming active oversight of company operations starting Monday. All current projects will continue, but all new expenditures and commitments require her approval. As we prepared to leave, Rachel finally exploded. This is exactly why family businesses fail. Emotion over logic, grudges over profit. You're going to destroy everything Levi has built. I stopped at the conference room door and looked back at her. Rachel, Levi built this company with my money, my sacrifice, and my trust. If it gets destroyed, it won't be because I held him accountable. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. The confrontation was painful but necessary. Levi needed to learn that respect wasn't optional, that ownership had responsibilities, and that I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was his business partner, and it was time he started acting like it. The first week of my resumed oversight passed quietly, almost too quietly. Levi submitted expense reports without argument, attended our scheduled weekly meetings, and maintained a professional demeanor that felt strangely hollow. But I knew my son well enough to recognize the calm before the storm. It came on a Friday evening. I was reviewing the week's financial reports in my apartment when my phone rang. Rachel's number flashed on the screen. Opal, her voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. I was hoping we could talk. Woman to woman. About what, Rachel? About this situation with the company. I think there's been a misunderstanding, and maybe we can work something out that's better for everyone. I almost laughed. Now she wanted to negotiate. I'm listening, I said, genuinely curious about what approach she'd take. Well, Levi is just devastated about how things have gone. He feels like you don't trust him, like you think he's a failure. And honestly, Opal, this whole takeover, it's really affecting his self-esteem. There it was. The guilt manipulation, right on schedule. Rachel, Levi's self-esteem isn't my responsibility. His performance as a business manager is. But that's just it, she continued, her voice gaining confidence. The company was doing fine before you intervened. Yes, there were some expenses, but that's normal for a growing business. You're being too conservative, too afraid of risk. A $7,000 ring isn't a business risk, Rachel. It's personal spending with company funds. That ring was an investment in relationships. My mother has connections, influence. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. I set down my pen and gave her my full attention. What exactly are you proposing? I think you should step back again. Let Levi run the company the way it needs to be run. You've proven your point, shown your authority. Now let him get back to building the business. And if I refuse? The sweetness in her voice disappeared. Then you're going to destroy your relationship with your son permanently. Levi feels humiliated, controlled, like he can't be a man with his mother watching his every move. Is that really what you want? What I want, I said slowly, is for my son to run a profitable business responsibly. If that hurts his feelings, perhaps he needs to examine why. You're being cruel, Opal. Families should support each other, not tear each other down over money. I agree completely, which is why I'm confused about why you convinced my son to treat me like an inconvenience while showering your family with expensive gifts. Silence stretched between us. When Rachel spoke again, her mask had completely slipped. You know what? Fine. If you want to play hardball, we can play hardball. Levi doesn't need this company. He has options, better options. Such as? Companies that would appreciate his vision. Opportunities where he wouldn't have to answer to someone who's stuck in the past. There it was, the threat I'd been expecting. Rachel, if Levi wants to leave Henderson Construction, that's his choice. But he'll leave the same way he came, with nothing but his education and his potential. We'll see about that. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my apartment staring at the phone, feeling sad rather than angry. Rachel was fighting for what she saw as her family's future, but she was doing it by trying to manipulate and threaten me. It reminded me too much of the tactics she'd used to distance Levi from me in the first place. The next Monday, Harold called with news I'd been dreading. Opal, I received papers this morning. Levi and Rachel have retained an attorney. They're challenging your authority over the company. On what grounds? They're claiming undue influence and questioning your mental competence to make business decisions. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son was arguing in court, that I was mentally incompetent. They're also alleging that you've taken control of the company to spite them personally, not for legitimate business reasons. I closed my eyes, feeling a deep weariness settle over me. What do we need to do? We need to document everything. Your mental acuity, the business reasons for your decisions, the financial evidence of mismanagement. Fortunately, we have all of that. How long will this take? Months potentially, but Opal, there's something else. They're requesting immediate injunctive relief to prevent you from making any major changes to company operations while the case is pending. That evening, I called my older sister Margaret, something I rarely did anymore. At 70, she'd been through her own battles with ungrateful family members. Maggie, I need to ask you something. Am I being unreasonable? I told her the whole story, from the company celebration to the legal challenge. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. Opal, she said when I finished, that boy needs to learn that actions have consequences. But are you prepared for this to get uglier? What do you mean? Once lawyers get involved, families say things they can't take back. Are you ready for Levi to stand up in court and testify that you're incompetent? Are you prepared to fight your own son publicly? I thought about the little boy who used to fall asleep in my arms while I worked late at the office, the teenager who promised to pay me back for his college tuition, the young man who'd looked me in the eye and called the business his vision. Maggie, I raised him to be better than this. If he wants to fight me, then I'll show him what real strength looks like. The legal battle began in earnest 2 weeks later. Rachel had convinced Levi that I was having some kind of late-life crisis, that my decision to reassert control was irrational and vindictive. Their attorney painted me as a bitter old woman, trying to punish her successful son. But Harold had prepared meticulously. We had financial records showing the mismanagement, documentation of every expensive personal purchase charged to the company, and testimony from the company's long-term employees about the changes in leadership style. The most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Janet, the company's longtime bookkeeper, came forward with records she'd been keeping privately. Mrs. Henderson, she told Harold during preparation, I was worried about what I was seeing. The spending, the attitude changes. I started keeping copies of everything, just in case. Janet's records showed that Rachel had been pressuring Levi to make expensive purchases, always framing them as business necessities. She had documentation of conversations where Rachel had suggested that I was holding the company back and needed to be managed out of involvement. Most devastating was a recorded phone call where Rachel discussed plans to eventually buy me out at below market value, essentially forcing me to sell my majority stake for a fraction of what it was worth. She said Levi's inheritance was being stolen by an old woman who didn't understand modern business, Janet testified. She said they needed to find a way to get full control before Mrs. Henderson made decisions that would hurt their future. Listening to that testimony, I felt something break inside my chest. This wasn't just about business disagreements or different management styles. Rachel had been planning to steal my life's work, and she'd convinced my son to help her do it. The hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning in downtown court. Levi sat across the courtroom from me, his face carefully neutral, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Rachel sat beside him, her jaw set with determination. When it came time for Levi to testify about my mental competence, I watched my son struggle. He stumbled over his words, couldn't provide specific examples of my supposed incompetence, and repeatedly contradicted himself when pressed for details. Mr. Henderson, the judge asked finally, can you point to any specific business decision your mother has made that demonstrates poor judgment? Levi glanced at Rachel, then back at the judge. She's being too controlling, too conservative. She doesn't understand that businesses need to spend money to grow. But has she made any decisions that have lost the company money? No, but has she implemented any policies that have hurt company operations? The oversight is slowing things down. Mr. Henderson, yes or no? has your mother made any decisions that have demonstrably harmed the business?" The silence stretched for almost a minute. Finally, Levi whispered, "No." The judge ruled in my favor within an hour. Not only did I retain full authority over Henderson Construction, but the court's findings included language about the financial mismanagement that had necessitated my intervention. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt hollow rather than victorious. I'd won the legal battle, but I'd lost something I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Levi caught up with me in the parking lot. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I never wanted this to go this far." I stopped walking and looked at my son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. He looked older, tired, defeated. "Levi, I'm not angry at you for fighting me. I'm heartbroken that you thought I was your enemy. Rachel said you were trying to control my life, that you couldn't let me be independent. And what do you think now?" He looked down at his shoes, the same gesture he'd made as a child when he knew he'd done something wrong. "I think I made a mistake. A lot of mistakes." For a moment, I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be fine, to go back to the way things were before Rachel had poisoned his mind against me. But I'd learned something important over the past few months. Love without respect was just enabling, and respect had to be earned. 6 months after the court ruling, I sat in my new office overlooking the lake, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink. It was a view I'd never thought I'd have, a life I'd never imagined possible at 64. The decision to sell Henderson Construction hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. After the legal battle, the company felt tainted, heavy with the weight of family conflict and broken trust. Levi had returned to work under my supervision, but the dynamic was awkward, strained. We were both walking on eggshells, and that's no way to run a business. The buyer was a larger construction firm that had been interested in our client base and reputation for quality work. They offered more than I'd expected, enough to secure my future and leave something substantial for Levi, despite everything that had happened. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Levi had asked when I told him about my decision to sell. We were sitting in the conference room where our relationship had fundamentally changed, where I'd learned to see him as he really was, rather than who I'd hoped he'd become. "Yes," I'd replied simply. "It's time for both of us to start fresh." The sale had taken 3 months to finalize. During that time, Levi and I worked together more harmoniously than we had in years. Without Rachel's constant influence, she'd grown distant after their legal defeat, spending more time with her parents and less time offering business advice. Levi seemed to remember who he'd been before marriage had changed his priorities. He was still my son, still capable of the kindness and intelligence I'd raised him to have. But he was also someone who'd chosen to betray me when pushed by his wife, and that knowledge colored every interaction. "What will you do now?" he'd asked me on the last day as we cleared out our offices. "I'm going to live," I'd told him. "Really live, for the first time in decades." And that's exactly what I did. The lakefront cottage I bought was small but perfect, with large windows that filled every room with light. I furnished it slowly, carefully, choosing pieces I loved rather than things that were practical or impressive. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based solely on what made me happy. I joined the local historical society and discovered a passion for researching old family records. I took pottery classes and surprised myself by being decent at it. I traveled, not the hurried business trips of my working years, but leisurely journeys to places I'd always wanted to see. The loneliness I'd expected never materialized. Instead, I felt peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced since childhood. I woke up each morning knowing that my day belonged to me, that I didn't owe anyone my time, energy, or emotional labor unless I chose to give it. Levi called occasionally, awkward conversations where he updated me on his job search, and I shared neutral details about my new life. Rachel was notably absent from these calls. Their marriage, I learned from Margaret's careful gossip network, was struggling under the weight of their legal defeat and financial reality. "She really thought they'd get the company," Margaret told me during one of our monthly lunches. Now that it's sold and you're financially independent, she can't figure out how to manage Levi without the promise of inheritance. I felt sorry for Levi, but not sorry enough to rescue him. He'd made his choices, aligned himself with someone who saw his family as obstacles to overcome rather than people to cherish. Now he was living with the consequences. The real surprise came 8 months after the sale, when Levi showed up at my cottage unannounced on a rainy Thursday evening. I opened the door to find him standing on my porch, soaked and miserable, looking more like the lost little boy I remembered than the confident businessman he'd tried to become. "Mom, can we talk?" I let him in, gave him a towel and a cup of coffee, and waited. I'd learned the value of silence, of letting other people fill the space with their own truths. "Rachel and I are getting divorced," he said finally. I nodded, but didn't respond. This wasn't my business unless he chose to make it my business. She's been having an affair with one of her business school classmates, someone with a trust fund and no family complications. He laughed bitterly. Turns out when you don't have a company to inherit or a wealthy mother to manipulate, you're not as attractive to certain kinds of people. "I'm sorry you're hurting," I said, and I meant it. Whatever else had happened, I didn't want my son to suffer. "Are you?" he asked, looking at me with eyes that held a new kind of understanding. "Sorry, I mean, because I wouldn't blame you if you weren't." I considered the question seriously. "I'm sorry that you're in pain. I'm not sorry that you're learning what it feels like to be used by someone who claims to love you." He winced, but nodded. "That's fair." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain against the windows and the distant sound of loons calling across the lake. "I was horrible to you," he said eventually. "Not just during the legal stuff, but for years before that. I let Rachel convince me that you were the problem, that your involvement in my life was holding me back. I was so eager to be the successful husband she wanted that I forgot how to be a decent son." "Yes," I agreed, "you were horrible to me, horrible." He looked surprised by my directness, but I was done softening truths to spare his feelings. "I gave you everything I had," I continued. "My time, my money, my energy, my dreams. I worked myself to exhaustion so you could have opportunities I never had. And when you became successful enough to take care of yourself, you decided I was an embarrassment." Tears were running down his cheeks now, but I didn't stop. "You gave me a $5 flower while spending thousands on someone else's mother. You tried to have me declared mentally incompetent in court. You stood by while your wife planned to steal my life's work. Those aren't mistakes, Levi. Those were choices." "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I hate myself for it." "Good," I said simply. "You should hate yourself for it. The question is what you're going to do with that knowledge." He looked up at me, searching my face for something I wasn't sure I was ready to give. "Can you forgive me?" I thought about it for a long moment, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to give him an honest one. "I can forgive you," I said finally. "But I can't forget what you're capable of when it serves your interests. And I can't go back to being the mother who sacrifices everything for a son who sees that sacrifice as weakness." "What does that mean for us?" "It means we can have a relationship, but it will be different. You'll need to earn my trust again, and that will take time. Years, probably. And if you ever treat me the way you did during your marriage to Rachel, I will walk away permanently. I won't give you another chance to break my heart." He nodded, understanding that I was offering him something precious and fragile. "I'd like to try," he said, "to earn your trust again, to be the son you deserved all along. Then you can start by getting a job and supporting yourself. No loans, no assistance, no shortcuts. Show me you can be independent without tearing other people down." Over the following months, Levi did exactly that. He found work with a smaller construction company, took a significant pay cut, and began rebuilding his life from the ground up. He called weekly, but didn't push for more contact than I was comfortable with. He sent cards on holidays, but didn't expect invitations to celebrate together. Slowly, carefully, we began to construct a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. It wasn't the close bond we'd had when he was young, and it wasn't the strained dynamic of his marriage years. It was something entirely new, an adult relationship between two people who shared history but had learned to see each other clearly. A year after our rainy evening conversation, Levi brought me flowers for my 66th birthday. Not gas station flowers, but a beautiful arrangement from a real florist. More importantly, he brought them because he wanted to celebrate me, not because he needed something from me. "Thank you," I said, accepting the bouquet. "Thank you for giving me another chance," he replied. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw someone I was cautiously beginning to respect again. He had a long way to go to fully redeem himself, but he was making the effort honestly, without expectation of quick forgiveness or easy restoration. That evening, as I arranged the flowers in a vase by my window, I realized I was happy. Not just content or peaceful, but genuinely happy. I had built a life that belonged entirely to me, surrounded myself with beauty and quiet joy, and learned to value my own worth, independent of anyone else's recognition. At 66, I was finally free. Free from the weight of other people's expectations, free from the need to prove my value through sacrifice, free from the fear that setting boundaries made me a bad mother. I had given Levi everything, and he had thrown it away. But in losing him, I had found myself. And that, I realized, was worth more than all the gratitude he'd never shown me. The woman who had once measured her worth by her son's success now knew that her value had never depended on anyone else's approval. I was enough, exactly as I was, and no one would ever make me forget that again. Standing at my window, looking out at the lake that had become my sanctuary, I smiled. The future stretched ahead of me, uncertain but entirely my own. And for the first time in decades, that felt like exactly enough. Now I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.